Welcome to the first show of the new 1776 Covenant. I'm here today in a lovely place being produced by Levi and his great equipment, and I appreciate that greatly, Levi. I call myself Mark the Freedom Poet because I might as well tell you why. I taught my roommate in a very liberal college in the 60s to quit college and go to Vietnam. I was so frustrated with everything and fighting with my professors. And he was my roommate, and he felt exactly the same way, and we were in a minority. So we went off to San Antonio to test and see if we'd qualify for officer candidate school, and we did. But then somebody noticed that I had scabs and sores on my hands. And they said, we've got to have you be checked out by the dermatology clinic. Long story short, I was rejected because I had a skin disease. The officer in charge of this medical unit told me, you've got atopic dermatitis. And he brought in a bunch of nurses and people paraded around me and said, this won't keep me out of Vietnam, will it? And he said, of course it would. You wouldn't live a month in the jungle. So I came home. Bob went over there and quickly died, throwing himself on a grenade for his platoon. And it just about finished me off until, to honor his memory, I began calling myself Mark the Freedom Poet. And since then, I've been dedicated to the idea, the same idea that our founding fathers came to when they cried out, we behold that these truths come straight from the heart of God. And we hold them to be as perfect as they can possibly be. We are created equal, and that means every man, woman, and child on earth. And our rights come from God. They're inalienable. No king can take them away. We're as good as any aristocrat. We are true Democrats in that sense. So these wild men, finally, after a period of 150 years since the beginning of colonizing what would become the 13 colonies, had had enough of the tyranny of the king and his ministers and said, now we're going to stand against this tyranny. We're going to stand up no matter what it takes. So, not only did they have a Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July, 1776, but they also declared war on the richest, strongest nation in the world, who was getting a bunch of help from profound and battle-tested Prussians who happened to have 17-inch bayonets and didn't like to take prisoners. This is about as daunting an escapade as you can imagine. And then these men pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to this incredible idea. They appealed to God's mercy, protection, and they believed they had a chance to win. Their whole way of looking at it was expressed powerfully by Patrick Henry. Give me liberty or give me death. Patrick Henry was such an inspiration to Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, that Thomas Jefferson said, when I heard him, my life started again. This was the most important day in my life when I heard the clarity, the power, the oratorical skills of Patrick Henry. The irony was that Patrick Henry became the first governor of Virginia, and he was followed by Thomas Jefferson, but a lot of water over the dam before then. So I am introducing something that I believe is the kind of power, the covenantal power that our founding fathers tapped into. And that is a new 1776 covenant. Has two simple parts that are incredibly complex and will provoke a lot of debates and probably some troubles for me in my life. These two tenets of the new 1776 covenant are, teach the truth. Abraham Lincoln said, it's not history if it's not the truth. That made me believe it is possible to get to enough of the truth to where I could understand the path from then until now and how to maintain the truth, how to maintain what became the republic, how to maintain individual liberty for all. Because there is only the truth. All else is smoke and mirrors and lies. Our enemies hate the idea of equality. Nothing is more anathema to individual equality, being equal to the most pompous ruler, king, bureaucrat, aristocrat, than individual liberty who are free in their spirit and willing to die and have an eternal perspective. There's only one thing more powerful than that, and that is God Himself. The mystery of God Himself, Creator God Himself. And every person that's ever lived anywhere on earth will have a different facet, presentation, just for Him, just like His own DNA. When the miracle of the connection of the Father's sperm and the mother's egg in one instant created an irreducibly complex, new, created individual, God gave us the honor to be partakers in His great creation of another human being. The Founding Fathers believed this, that we're created. And yes, the same year that Lincoln was born, Darwin came along and said, no, we're not. We're just an accident. Just things evolved from a lower form to a higher form. So the first point I beg you to consider, and it must be the foundation of where we go from here, is your worldview. Is it in the beginning God, or in the beginning gas or accident or chaos? How did we become who we are? How did we get here? What was our beginning? Did chaos turn into perfect order? The stunning order of the perfect distance from the moon and from Jupiter, the stunning beauty of the range of temperature of Earth, the myriad of miraculous placements by the hand of God, or did all of this just happen willy-nilly? And again, I say, proof of the pudding is in the eating. I have been so blessed to meet enough patriots who live, and some have already died, who truly believe we are created in the image of God and are to serve Him with our lives, to love His creatures with our love, that its best is a mere shadow of His love, that we can do what is impossible in the eyes of man, like the Founding Fathers who stood up against the king and said victory or death. And because they knew there was a home in glory waiting for them, it didn't matter. In fact, some of the older ones, Ben Franklin was getting really doddery, and by the time he helped write the Constitution, he was 81, 12 years later. It's so important to understand that this is just one aspect of the truth, but because it was infused in all of the people who signed their name, 56 men signed their name, and these were not hypocrites. This was a high price to sign their name to the Declaration of Independence. They believed it unto death, that God created them and gave them their rights. So the first truth we must understand is that. The second truth that I have come to believe is that 12 years later, they gave us a Constitution on the 17th of September, 1787. And then a few years later, they gave us the Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution, tying down for the individuals and the states their equal rights. This magnificent collection of free organic pieces, the Declaration of Independence, our nation's creed has been called, our birth certificate has been called, the foundational floor, the real preamble of our Constitution, it's been called, and then this incredible Constitution written by men who hate the tyranny of power. George Washington said, power is like a fire. It's okay as a tool, but it's hideous and frightful as a master. Power must be contained and constrained. So they dreamed up this incredible checks and balances, having a bicameral legislature, a House and a Senate. They trusted man's love for power so much that they wanted to make sure he didn't have very much and it could be countered by someone else. They had a group called the House of Representatives, which was chosen and picked in roughly equal areas of population. In other words, now it's around it's around 800,000 to 1 million people have one congressional member who starts all legislation, if they're true to the Constitution, and starts all spending must start in the House of Representatives. Then it goes to the second check and balance, the second body of deliberation, the Senate, where the terms are 6 years. So a third of them turn over every 2 years. This slows down the passion of the spontaneity of the House of Representatives, and gives cooler heads a chance to prevail, who represent the entire state. Some states, like Texas, have 35 congressional districts. From the border, which the number one issue is the ebb and flow of immigration, legal and illegal, to the epicenter of Dallas-Fort Worth, where many social issues, where so many unplanned pregnancies, so many abortion clinics are, where so many fatherless homes are languishing, and to the beautiful prairies of the Panhandle, Texas, where oil is still drilled, to West Texas. They have different constituencies with different priorities, as did all of our founding fathers. The 56 men that signed the Declaration and the 55 men who signed who appeared at the Constitutional Convention, and only 39 of them could in clear conscience sign. Some of those that didn't sign shows an example of the truth of the character of our founding fathers. The reason they didn't sign was because this Constitution was too powerful, too much power in the hands of one. And of course, it also included a presidency, a chief magistrate. Many of them wanted a king. The only king they could really imagine was George Washington, but it also had a judiciary that had some independence. So it was this three major parts of this amazing government, also constrained by states' rights. Also, they said anything that wasn't in the Constitution wasn't a right declared or a duty or a power in the Constitution. It was reserved for the people and for the states. So somehow they cobbled together this with prayer. They were floundering until Benjamin Franklin said, "We're not going anywhere. We're just arguing every day." And remember way back when we were besieged by the British, how when we met in this very room, we began each day with prayer. All of the different denominations got together and prayed, and some of them it was even against their teachings of their particular denominations. But they were so beset, and they realized they didn't have the strength, they didn't have the wisdom, and they didn't have the patience, and they didn't have the degree of love to listen to each other, to embrace each other, and to realize, I might have to trim this. I might have to throw away this desperate, needed thought of mine. And then Roger Sherman, a devout Christian, one of the 5 men who signed both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, came up with that magnificent compromise for the little states and the big states, because we had western states, we had southern states, slave states, we had northern states, we had ocean states, we had rural states, we had farming states, and so they wanted to have, and little states like Rhode Island, each of them wanted to have a state where they had power. Each of these constituencies had power, but also, so that would give tremendous advantage to New York and Pennsylvania that had enormous populations, and Virginia. But the little states would really be overwhelmed and not really have a place. It's like if the Electoral College hadn't been put in our Constitution, South Dakota, North Dakota, Alaska, Wyoming, Montana would never see a presidential candidate. The founding fathers were so nervous about the abuse of power, saying things like, absolute power corrupts, absolutely, that they came to this compromise where then they gave every state, big or small, 2 votes. Now this just ripped some of them apart. And some of them couldn't sign it and said, oh my, we're giving too much power to both the government and the big states. So they didn't sign it, but they needed to have, they said they would consider it if they were promised that the first Congress would give them a Bill of Rights. They did something that I can hardly see happening today. They shook hands and said, I promise. James Madison said, I promise you. And besides that, I'm going to do everything I can to get elected as a representative from Virginia, and I will fight for a Bill of Rights. And he shook hands with these men. And George Washington said the same thing. These men agreed to a promise in the distance, which proved to be many years, or at least three before they got them all ratified. And that was enough to finally get the Constitution ratified by 9 states. This process, because of the intensity, you can see it in our own Senate now, where issues sometimes are decided by the vice presidential vote, breaking a 50-50 tie. Delicate is the balance between individual definition of what is true and right and just and good legislation, bad legislation, what's freedom and what isn't. So when I say we need to elect the best and teach the truth, how do we possibly come up with a means of doing that? We have to seek the truth, like Thomas Jefferson said, wherever it leads. And again, I jump ahead to the pudding. The fact that more people have been blessed by America in the world than any other 10 countries put together. By that I mean what the missionaries have done, what the doctors have done, what the largesse has done. Do you realize that America grew to become the richest, strongest, most free, and most generous nation in all of history? Because of the unfettered freedom of people practicing free enterprise and capitalism? It's just magnificent what we have done, so much of it without strings, because of the power of our system and the wisdom of our founding fathers. So I say that's good enough to me. I lived on the border of Canada, and that's, under Trudeau, and it's slipped kind of off the bacon. They depend on America for their protection. Europe is going more and more socialistic. The difference between a republic and raw democracy is the difference between rule of law based on the sanctity of God-given rights and responsibilities and group or mob rule, majority rule. The difference. This is why the founding fathers hated the government form called democracy. Where it gets confusing is they call themselves Democrats in contrast to the aristocrats. Thomas Jefferson, who started the Democrat-Republican Party and called himself a Republican, met the fancy ambassador from Great Britain to the White House, who was very dressed up. His wife had her jewels on, and he came to the door in a bathrobe and his slippers to make the point that we're all equal. I'm your equal. I know you sneeringly look down at us, and now the seeds of the War of 1812 were in the air. But these people and that kind of truth, where I can look into the eyes of a black or a yellow or a red child and see someone so fresh from the hand and the love and the heart of God himself, that I realize what is at the center and the core and the very being, the essence of the United States of America is love, godly for all creation, godly love, and a godly desire for truth, justice, and the American way, which is truth, love, and justice. A friend of mine is in the state legislature of South Dakota, and she helps us begin to answer the question, how do we elect the best? The brilliant and totally committed and totally sold out to Jesus, Tina Mullally, is one of the 70 members of the South Dakota House of Representatives. She gets a 100% voting record from some groups like CPAC and pro-life groups. And this is her 5 principles before she'll even consider voting for a bill. 1, does it go against God's law? See, the law of the 10 Commandments was the foundation of American law and the foundation of our Constitution. 2, does it go against the Constitution? That means you got to understand the Constitution. You got to understand what God's law is. You got to understand that they are God's blessing. And then, does it impede on citizens' rights? Does this proposed bill increase taxes? Every level of government that I can think of in the United States spends too much and taxes too much in some means or another. Does it grow the size of government and government control over our lives and bureaucracy? If the answer is no to all of those questions, then I will consider to vote for the bill. So that's the beginning of it. But what the founding fathers did is they would find the most conscientious, the most respected, people that they could think of, the people that they would die for, who would die for them, who had represented by their lives up to this point that they were true servant leaders. Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and James Madison and Abraham Lincoln and James Monroe and John Quincy Adams were truly humble servant leaders. John Adams had a little problem with following in the gigantic shoes and footsteps of George Washington, and he had a very thin skin, and he passed something called the Alien Sedition Act. And the Sedition Act meant, don't criticize me too much or I'll throw you in jail. And that upset Thomas Jefferson so much that he started his party, and immediately one of his first acts when he got elected was to end the law of sedition. So in other words, he wanted people to be able to say anything, however cruel, about him without recourse or recrimination. So this brings us to the end of the first segment. We'll step further into the kind of people that brought us the principles that had filled the hearts of our founding fathers, the people that from the Mayflower Compact and the Penn Covenant and the City on the Hill in Boston. We will talk about them and what they did for us, and the relations with the Native Americans, and the relations with the slaves and the people that they came into contact from as early as 1607 right through into the Civil War, and the ebb and flow of true history, reflecting on these great and true patriotical people. So I want to thank you so much for the time you've spent. Again, I want to thank Levi for this opportunity, and we will be back in a period of time, maybe 1 week, with session number 2 of the new 1776 covenant. God bless you, God bless America, and thanks be to God for the opportunity to have this freedom of speech.